Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišák, and I work as the deputy head of the foreign desk at the Slovak daily Pravda, which by the name means truth, and is not the Russian Pravda. Olshoya Hartsova is an analyst on Eurasia Group's Europe team covering Central and Eastern Europe. She is definitely the right person to speak with about the upcoming elections in Hungary, which will be held on April 12th. Will Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his party Fidesz lose power after 16 years? Would he accept defeat if he loses? And would Orbán's challenger Péter Magyar, leader of the TISA party, concede if his attempt to oust the current Hungarian government is unsuccessful? Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. You can find the link in the description of this episode. And now, on to the new debate. Orsi, in Hungary, we have two types of polls. The independent ones quite clearly favors TISA, the opposition party of Péter Magyar, while those linked to Fidesz or Viktor Orbán claim that the current government will win. How should one make sense of this?
That's a great question. We have seen quite a high number of polls in the past couple of months, and most of these are independent polling agencies, quite reliable ones, especially the ones we follow, for example, is Median 21 Research Center, led by Daniel Rona, IDEA, Republicon, Zavets Research. So these are just some of the examples, and they are all showing a TISA lead. There is a difference, often, of course, in the percentages. When Median published the 23 percentage point lead for TISA among decided voters, that was quite a surprise to everyone. I think that was the highest, one of the higher, if not the highest one. That was quite a surprise. But at the end of the day, there is a consensus among independent pollsters that there is a clear TISA lead. And I'm hearing that that's quite unprecedented, that this kind of consensus they haven't seen in the past 16 years. And I do think that some of this lead, especially the high 20 double-digit ones, is, I think, a bit overly optimistic. But I think what it shows to me that TISA is leading, and TISA, if nothing extraordinary happens, which you cannot, of course, disregard, then I think TISA is on track to win, in my opinion, most likely with a simple majority. What we did actually recently at Eurasia Group, we averaged independent pollster results, pro-government, publicly available pollster results, and all independent pollster results. In the average pro-government pollsters, Fidesz is in lead, of course, that's not surprising, but even there the gap narrowed in the past months when I looked at the curve, and all poll average and independent poll average shows a clear TISA lead.
Why is Fidesz even using those polls that are not independent? Or put it that way, if I would be them, if I would use those polls that I can publish basically what I want, I would probably publish the polls like, okay, being very tight, because that would maybe somehow, my supporters will look at this and, okay, we have to fight. But in those polls, Fidesz is also quite comfortably leading. So why is Fidesz publishing those polls?
And we have to remember that it's not exactly Fidesz publishing. They are under the pollster specifically, and some of them, if not all of them, are claiming that they are independent and their methodology is proven. They are saying that it is different than independent pollster methodology, which I think is completely fine. But at the end of the day, it's strange to see such difference and deviation between those numbers. And you clearly see the deviation between those pollsters and the ones that operate on, based on market need, basically. To me, what I'm seeing when it comes to the Fidesz lead, I expected more numbers from the pro-Fidesz pollsters and more pollsters publishing as well. There are now polls published by institutions that didn't publish polling numbers before, so then you automatically question the validity. I mean, if you compare it to Median or Zavets, who have been polling for decades. That's, of course, a completely different track record. But I don't think it's too many on the pro-government side. And there are pollsters from whom I expected to see numbers, and I'm not seeing any. So we are even seeing those examples that some of them used to publish, and now they are not publishing. And that is a bit odd to me, that why this is. And also, it is a bit strange to see that you see TISA lead in all other polls. I mean, when we average the results, actually the latest ones, it might not include the very latest ones, but it was probably around 9 percentage points. So it didn't reach the double digit, but that's still enough for a simple majority, according to more people. And I'm more conservative on this. And then you see a result from Nézőpont, which shows a Fidesz lead. I believe it was 6 percentage point. I saw then another, Fidesz lead. And you question that how is this possible? I do think that there could be variations that, of course, when you phone people or you send a link or you do some online polling, of course, you reach completely different people. So I think that's built in. Even the sample size, sometimes it's 1,000, but for some pollsters, it's 1,500. So it's not complete, but I think there are biases that it's now part of the public understanding. And I don't remember an instance, definitely not in the past 16 years, that you didn't see any pro-Fidesz numbers or pro-opposition numbers. You kind of see it every time, but the huge difference is now that the majority of pollsters believe in TISA, and there are just a few against that. So you naturally believe the majority.
Kimlen Shepely, a professor of sociology at Princeton University, said that Orbán's Hungary demonstrated how autocrats can rig elections legally, using their parliamentary majorities to modify the law to neutralize whatever strategy the opposition adopts to try to beat them. So what is the most important feature of the Hungarian electoral system that still works in favor of Orbán?
I think there are a lot of features in the Hungarian electoral system that favor Orbán. Actually, there is a lot of built-in features in the system that favor Orbán. For example, when Fidesz slightly readjusted, let's put it this way, the system, they also changed the constituency boundaries, and that many people argue that advantages Fidesz, how much the rural areas are counted versus the constituencies where cities are more dominant. That's likely also benefits Fidesz, for example. And then there are very complicated elements involved, such as the winner's compensation as well as the loser's compensation. And because of the winner's compensation, that's why in Hungary it's relatively easier to reach constitutional majority. So if you have a very, very strong simple majority win, stepping up to the constitutional majority is not that difficult. And because the Hungarian electoral system has two lists, right? There is the national party list and there is a constituency list. And my argument is that the election is decided in the constituencies, basically, because of the number of seat distribution. And when you look at past results, Fidesz won the election without having the popular vote. And on top of that, they even secured a constitutional majority without actually having the popular vote. So they were there below 50%, which kind of shows to me that constituencies really matter and the rural areas do matter. And Fidesz is historically strong there. That's where their core voter base is. Not exclusively just there, of course, but that plays a big part. So I think that's a challenge for Péter Magyar and any opposition party, basically, to try to reach out to those voters and convince them. And because of these electoral biases, there is more or less a consensus among analysts that you need 4 to 5 percentage points just to level the playing field. I personally like to add 3 percentage points to that because of the margin of error in more pollsters, so that makes me more conservative maybe than some of my colleagues. So that's why I count with an 8 percentage point consistent polling lead that you would need to win with simple majority. And TISA has that. And this is why I believe that they have a better chance to win, among other factors as well.
I think that this is a very cautious approach, but also a very good approach. I would also say that 8%, consistent 8 to 10%, really is indicating that TISA has a healthy lead that might transfer into a simple majority, basically, simple majority victory. And of course, that will be a big victory. But let's talk about the campaign a bit. And there are also external factors in the campaign heavily involved. We have seen reports that Russia is helping Fidesz with its campaign, and that is largely built on fear-mongering and false claims about Ukraine. Is this the only way Orbán can stay in power? I mean, that he will further polarize society? Because this is not a new tactic. Polarization of society is a tactic for Fidesz for many, many years. But does Orbán need to go even further?
Yeah, I pointed it out correctly. I believe that polarization is something that we have seen for years now, and not just in Hungary, but in other Central Eastern European countries, of course. Also, foreign malign influence and disinformation that has been part of elections in this region for a long time now. So frankly, I think a surprise would be if there were to be none of those in this election or any other election in the region for that matter, and especially after the Romania example, which was again an extreme end of it. I think that Fidesz is very good at campaigning. I think a lot of people underestimate actually how good they are. They have been campaigning for 16 plus years successfully. And their campaign worked before, but the part of the reason why the campaign worked before is that they didn't have a serious challenger. Most of the time it was fractured opposition parties, but even when the opposition united, it wasn't really a proper challenger to Orbán. And now they do have this, and now it seems like that a good campaign, the electoral system, however the way it is just not enough, because you have to add it to the fact that also Magyar is very good at campaigning. And I think that did surprise a lot of people, because Magyar's party basically started more or less as a movement. And when they started campaigning, it campaigned as a movement. And now if you look at TISA's campaign, it's professional, it has a clear message, it systematically reaches out to people online and on the ground. You see there is a clear strategy behind it, and Magyar is an amazing leader. I think nobody should deny that, because that, in my opinion, wouldn't be true. So, and what we are seeing this time, and especially in the last couple of months, is maybe last couple of weeks, that Fidesz has issues with its campaign. We have seen mistakes in the campaign that we haven't seen before. That's a bit of a surprise. I think the technique or the graphics itself, the messaging, it's still designed as a good campaign should be. It's just that I don't think it is working. The war fear-mongering, of course, it's related mostly to the Ukraine war. I mean, we could talk about the Middle East as well, but I personally think that Ukraine has more implications and probably more connection because of geography as well to the region. But I don't think this is working. The Ukraine war has been going on for a long time now, so maybe it has worked in the beginning, but now, you know, when there is no surprise effect, when there is no major escalation, especially close to the Hungarian border, I think we have to remember that as well. This is a big country, so it matters where the escalation is as well. Then you start to wonder that, is this working? Maybe you should start talking about other topics if this is not. And when I look at polls, what voters are most concerned about, usually it is not the war anymore, but it's the state of the economy and cost of living. And Magyar is just better at campaigning and talking about those topics specifically. And Viktor Orbán hasn't talked much about the economy, and when he did, you know, this example he was using about the airplane taking off, that, you know, it's not a great argument when you have been in power for 16 years, and it's a problem if you cannot show results. And some of it is not his fault. There were, COVID, energy crisis, now the situation, of course, but it has been 16 years. And the other topic, of course, huge topic is healthcare that Fidesz hasn't talked about much. And Magyar has been talking about it for 2+ years. And it's very difficult for Fidesz to react to it. I think at this point you also have to react if you have an opposition candidate who challenges you. But I haven't seen much, reaction that could significantly convince voters. Of course, the war in Ukraine topic, it's there, it is going to be there. Brussels appears as well, but Brussels appears in the campaign, in the slogans all the time. I mean, this is not the first time we are seeing this, so I'm just not seeing this kind of new element in the campaign. And this is what a lot of people are saying, that, okay, we have heard these topics before. What's new? What are the new promises? And I think it's just not convincing to voters when you have someone else talking about their everyday concerns that are linked to cost of living and the economy simply.
Talking about Péter Magyar, and he was active within Fidesz for quite a long time. Is this an advantage for him? Does he know all the dirty tricks of Fidesz?
That's a good question. I don't know Péter Magyar, unfortunately. Maybe someday I will have the chance to meet him, but I don't have an answer to this. But what I know is, and this is what makes Péter Magyar different from anyone else, any other former challenger, is that, as you say, he is former Fidesz, so he's not necessarily a liberal candidate. He is actually a patriotic, traditional candidate, essentially appeals to more or less the same voters or the same voter groups as Viktor Orbán. And on top of that, he also appeals to some anti-Fidesz or non-Fidesz sympathizers, let's put it that way, because he represents change, right? But of course, the biggest problem is that he can tap into a Fidesz voter base. And I'm not talking about the hardcore Fidesz voters, because I think those are really, really difficult to win over. But in general, you don't have to compromise your patriotic, traditional, or even, Christian values to vote for Péter Magyar instead of Viktor Orbán. And this is a first thing, and this is a problem. So this is where I see Péter Magyar being different. And the fact that he is a former Fidesz loyalist, he was connected to the party, to the system. And I think that essentially in people's understanding means that he knows it, but he also knows what to change. And there is a reason why he turned against it. And I think that makes him quite credible.
Also, you partially answer my question that will follow, but what topics does TISA emphasize in the campaign? Because it's very clear that it is about economy. And if Fidesz cannot even mention the economy in the campaign, this is a clear disadvantage for them. So is this, TISA is emphasizing, the economy is bad and we have a recipe how to make it better?
I think Fidesz do mention the economy, just that they frame it differently and they use different data. They use data on the strengths of the middle class, while other people, directly contradict this data. Plus, there are a lot of giveaways that Fidesz, we all know, that introduced, making life of some groups in the society easier. So they are doing it. But then there are other structural problems in the economy that they don't talk about much because they are not fixed. But maybe the other topic that we should definitely mention, apart from the economy, cost of living and healthcare, is the anti-corruption agenda. I think that's Magyar's actually number one topic, and has been Magyar's number one topic since the EP campaign. So that's 2+ years now. And he has this very, very strong anti-corruption agenda. And I think actually this is something that appeals to voters most. And maybe after that I would put the economy and the state of services after, but he basically emphasizes corruption within the public sector and also related to it, and he promises to change it. So this, I can imagine that this is something that resonates with people the most. Me as an analyst, for me, it is not yet 100% convincing how he will change it deep into the system. Because of course you can introduce legislation, you can make an example out of some companies, or you can try. I mean, it happened in Slovakia as well. But making deep systemic changes after 16 years of Fidesz rule, and during these 16 years you have seen the constitution being changed, rewritten, even renamed. That means they renamed the constitution basic law and rewrote it multiple times. So there are very, very deep systemic changes that are not easy to make, and they are actually not quick to make. You can change some of the public tendering procedures, for example, which I believe will be very important. You can do internal reshuffling, even replace some people, but deep systemic changes, I think they take years.
So is Magyar genuinely interested in changing all the system? Because some people might even argue that, let's say, TISA wins the constitutional majority, which is not a given, not at all. But if that happened, what if Magyar will simply try to take over the system and use it for its own advantage?
Yes, I heard these opinions as well. And of course, you never know. Magyar is a newcomer, basically. Magyar has never been tested in a sense that he has never been a prime minister, of course. I mean, he is at the European Parliament, but that's completely different. So in a way, we will know once he's actually in that position. I agree with you that constitutional majority, it's not impossible, but I would give around 50% to a simple majority win, so much more likely. I think he wants to make these changes, actually. I'm quite confident that what he is saying, he actually wants to achieve. To me, the question is how, and if there is an understanding that this might be more challenging than they expected. I think some of the things they will only know once they are in power, right? Because of course, as an outsider, you cannot know everything, so you will not exactly know what and how to change. I do think that legislatively they are prepared, that they do have a good strategy. I mean, we've seen their program, we know what's priority. Beyond that, I'm sure that they are preparing. And I do think that the will is there. And if there would be a constitutional majority win, I do think that they would go deep into the system and try to make systemic changes. And in a way, that's when it will be really tested, whether the electoral promises were actually serious or not. But I do think that there are. To me, the question is what and how soon. And it will not only depend on simple versus constitutional majority, it also depends on how fragile the simple majority is. Because if it's just a couple of seats of difference, then it will be quite difficult, because you also have to keep the party together. I mean, we all know how politics works. And I think Magyar should expect a very strong opposition from Fidesz. I mean, Fidesz was in opposition before, and we all know that they are also very good at being in opposition. So it will not be easy.
So if TISA wins a narrow majority, does Orbán have the institutional tools, oil courts, the presidency, or even some emergency powers, but also political tools, mainly potential demonstration of Fidesz supporters, to delay or even block a transfer of power?
So I think if the election results will be close, then I think there will be a recount request. And I think that will delay the announcement of the official results, and ultimately they will add up to delaying government formation as well. So I think for markets, the worst is uncertainty, in my opinion, and the longer government formation drags on, the longer the uncertainty will be. If the vote is close, I expect even a couple of weeks delays. Normally, we counted government formation in May, by end of May. And in the past, government formation happened more or less like this. But if the vote is close, I would expect potentially even June, beginning of July in some extremer cases. And what's important to remember legislatively is that the outgoing parliament still has 30 days, and they can pass legislation in those 30 days, and Fidesz will have constitutional majority. So I think Fidesz will try to pass some legislation, but I think if Tisza's win is clear enough, I personally don't think that Fidesz would go to extremes. I mean, there were scenarios of significantly extending the powers of the president, preparing it for Orbán. I think if Fidesz tried something like this, there would be massive demonstrations and, of course, criticism as well from the international community, the EU, first of all. And I think Orbán knows that Tisza's base of supporters is very active. I mean, we are seeing it right now. So if there is a clear Tisza win and Fidesz tries to, pass some of these key legislations that's in a way unethical, I think there will be demonstrations. And I don't think this is something Fidesz wants to be dealing with. I don't think they want to be dealing with the public anger if it's to that scale. I mean, if the vote is close, again, that makes it more difficult. And I would expect, yes, that Fidesz will probably pass some laws. Some of it might not even make it to the headlines, but I do expect they will use it. And as you said, that even if Magyar wins, and especially if Magyar wins with the simple majority, Fidesz still has loyalists in key positions. We all know that. I mean, that includes the Constitutional Court, the General Prosecutor, and so on. So Fidesz has been there for 16 years, and also these mandates are quite long, and I think none of them will expire during the Tisza presidency. And so Tisza, with simple majority, cannot replace these key people. We wrote about this with our colleagues as well. They can only replace them with a constitutional majority. And I think this is something that will make passing laws, even passing the budget because of the role of the fiscal council there, but also prosecuting. If Tisza wants to go on with the anti-corruption agenda, that will make it significantly more difficult.
If Fidesz narrowly wins, would Magyar accept defeat?
I think if there is a narrow win in either case, I think there will be request for recount. I think Magyar will also investigate how Fidesz won, because at this point, I think if Fidesz wins, then everybody will question that how could all those posters be wrong? I don't think that Magyar will revolt himself, but I think he will ask for evidence and he will ask for recount. And if the vote is really close, I think there will be demonstrations.
In fact, we know that the elections won't be fair. We can probably talk about how much, but this is given. Those elections are relatively free, but not fair. So I think that we might see a lot of different scenarios. But to wrap it up, just one quick question about the Hungarian-Slovak relations. Do you think that the Magyar's victory could lead to worsening of the Slovak-Hungarian relations, as the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico will lose an ally, and Magyar also showed nationalistic tendencies?
It's a great question. I think this will definitely have implications in Brussels, in a sense that Hungary's position will change in Brussels and Hungary's viewpoints in Brussels. And there in Brussels, in the council, I don't think Fico and Magyar will be allies like Orbán and Fico was before. So that's where I see some of the major changes. When it comes to policies, that's a great question. I mean, we did see Péter Magyar standing up for the ethnic Hungarian community even when Orbán didn't. So that's interesting, even though we know that Orbán is very supportive of Hungarians living abroad, but it seems like Péter Magyar is as well. I think there will be some worsening in the bilateral relations. I think that's unavoidable. I don't think on the operational level this will apply too much, but probably in the highest political level, I can imagine this will happen. Also in the circles of the V4, coordination ahead of council meetings or any other international events. There, I wouldn't expect some natural connection between Péter Magyar and Robert Fico. So I definitely do think that these will be issues. I think there will be topics that they might disagree on. There will be topics that they might agree on. For example, Ukraine is a huge question, and we know that Péter Magyar has been very careful avoiding this question. And I think here actually Péter Magyar's position doesn't divert too much from other V4 countries like Czechia or Slovakia. I think Magyar is cautious as well. So there I don't necessarily expect a clear pro-Ukraine stance, for example, especially when it gets to questions related to enlargement, for example. On the energy front, that's also an interesting question because we know that Slovakia and Hungary are still highly reliant on Russian energy. I would expect some change here. I think Magyar will look into options of diversifying, but what complicates this in the war in Iran as well, that puts extra economic pressure on these countries as well. So to some extent, that might delay these diversification efforts is still questionable, but I do think that Magyar will try to diversify. And here we come to Russia. We do know that Viktor Orbán and the Fidesz government has been pro-Russia for a long time. They are open about it. I mean, they were state visits to Moscow, just like from Slovakia, there were state visits to Moscow. But with Péter Magyar in power, I see this changing. I see a major orientation towards Brussels, and I think this will make it different from Slovakia and might create some issues as well.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe and listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. The link is in the episode description. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.